Hello folks, J. Scott Phillips here, and today we are bound for the final frontier with a look at Spock Messiah, an early Bantam original Star Trek novel, first published in September of 1976 and written by Theodore R. Cogswell and Charles A. Spano Jr., not to be confused with Charles A. Spano Sr., so we'll make that clear right up front here. Now, this is an offering of mine to Book Trek 2026, which is now in its 5th year of running, Book Trek, which is a BookTube event now every summer in the months of June, July, and August, created by Vin at Revenant Reads to encourage all of us to be reading Star Trek fiction or Star Trek-related materials in whatever kind of book form or literary venture you might choose to. It doesn't have to be Star Trek fiction. He's got some side missions here that can be Star Trek adjacent in whatever manner you choose to read or are interested in. But it's a fun summer event, and me being a lifelong Star Trek fan, first generation actually. I started watching Star Trek when it was on first run, the original series on NBC back in the late 60s. So I go back a ways. And so I'm making an offering and probably some other offerings throughout the summer to the event. Now, I'll leave a link to Vin's announcement video in the show notes down below, as well as links to his vast command crew of co-hosts. So be sure and check them out if you're a Star Trek fan. And we'll get into this. Now, what I usually like to do on my videos here is talk a little bit about where the book came from, how it got written or published in the first place, kind of the ideas behind it. Then we talk about some of the feelings I've had about reading the book. And then one of my favorite things to do on my channel is to talk about the artwork. There were 3 editions, U.S. editions, of Spock Messiah, and we'll take a look at those 3 covers at the end of the video here. So let's start off, though, first by looking at the history of the publication of this somewhat notorious Star Trek novel. These are the 3 culprits that brought us Spock Messiah in September of 1976. And we'll start off on the left here with Frederik Pohl, our old pal Fred Pohl, who goes back to the golden age of science fiction. And in the 1970s, he was Bantam's science fiction editor, and as such, then anything Star Trek, because Bantam in those days had the license to publish Star Trek fiction, that fell under Fred Pohl's jurisdiction. The problem here was that Fred Pohl himself was not into Star Trek at all. He didn't know much about it other than it was a TV show, and yet it fell under his careful watch to edit anything Star Trek. And Bantam had learned early on that publishing Star Trek fiction was becoming a veritable goldmine, starting with the James Blish adaptations of the original TV show episodes. And then in 1970, Blish wrote the very first adult original science fiction novel, Spock Must Die. And all of those books were selling very well, probably helped by the fact that around the time that Spock Must Die came out, the original TV series went into syndication and reached a whole new audience and became vastly popular. And of course, Bantam, having the rights to print Star Trek fiction, was making money hand over fist as long as the Star Trek episodes were as popular as they were and to become even more popular. There was also the animated series, which those episodes were being adapted by Alan Dean Foster. Those were published by Ballantine Books. But Bantam had the licensing to publish original Star Trek fiction. And unfortunately, as Blish had been over the years writing more and more of those collections of early episode adaptations, his health was failing, and eventually his wife, J.A. Lawrence, started to help him write those, and then eventually took over completely and actually finished them up after his death. During that time, Blish had promised another original Star Trek novel, but he was gone now, and Fred Pohl desperately wanted to be publishing some new Star Trek fiction. There was a Star Trek, The New Voyages, that was a collection of fan short stories, but nothing original by a professional writer, and he really wanted to do that. And it may have actually been Bantam that really wanted him to do that because, as I say, Fred Pohl was not all that into Star Trek. But this fell under his watch, so he reached out to an old friend of his, a science fiction writer, who he thought would be up to writing a Star Trek novel, and that was Theodore R. Cogswell. And kind of a minor science fiction writer. A lot of us haven't heard of him other than through this book here. So Cogswell took the assignment, but realized right away that he did not know Star Trek very well. He felt that he could write and had some ideas, but he didn't know Star Trek well enough at all to write a story about that universe or those characters. So he drafted Charles A. Spano Jr. Now, both of these guys had run into each other at science fiction conferences and other things. They were both also teachers in Pennsylvania in those days, and Spano was an aspiring science fiction writer and had been talking to Cogswell to get advice on how to write science fiction better and be successful at it. And so that formed this team here of these two collaborators on Spock Messiah. Now, as I say, Spano supposedly knew the characters better than Cogswell. He kind of fancied himself as an expert on the show and of the characterizations, that sort of a thing. So he was jumping into this with both feet, and he had some ideas for the story, and he wrote the first draft and invented the plot and structured the characters in and around all of that. And then he handed the manuscript back over to Cogswell, who rewrote a lot of it, if not most of it, to put his own mark on the story. It was actually his assignment in the first place. So that kind of made sense. And then he wanted to tell the story in his own particular way, with his own personal thoughts and ideas and political leanings, perhaps. And thereby comes some of the criticism here, that this book is largely criticized for two things in particular. One, it's casual racism, and two, it's blatant sexism. And I think that the casual racism might be excused to some degree if we look at it within the context of the day it was written and what I think he was trying to do. Now, I might be wrong about this. A modern reader is going to have things jump off the page at him and go, whoa, that's a little explicit here. That's definitely a racist comment here. But they were things like this. He would refer to Sulu as the Oriental. That being an outmoded term now, the preferred term nowadays would be Asian. But even referring to that, why would you call somebody out in that way if you weren't having some issues racially with the character? Same with Uhura, who he would refer to as the Black. However, he would refer to other characters with some identifying feature, whether it be the Vulcan or the Doctor or the Engineer, or just an adjective that seemed easily to quickly identify somebody without, once again, just using the name, which can become kind of redundant here. And I think, or maybe I should say, I hope that the intention was that, just like Star Trek when it first came out in the 60s on television, that it was an attempt in the day to be inclusive, to show that this future world of Star Trek is going to include all these different ethnicities as equals on the ship, in the crew. And I believe, or again, like I say, I hope that was his intention. Cogswell's own political leanings were actually fairly left-leaning. He wrote about racial inequalities as a running theme in a lot of his early science fiction and fantasy stories. He was not shy about using words in some of his early work in the early 50s. He would drop some N-words here, but mostly for shock value. And then the outcome of the story was definitely anti-racial in the meaning of the stories. So I kind of want to give him a pass for this sort of a thing in Spock Messiah. You might disagree with me, and like I say, any modern reader here would probably have some reservations about this, definitely. But now there's the blatant sexism, and I don't know if there's really any defending this here. Spano and Cogswell have introduced a new character into the Star Trek world here, and this is Ensign Sarah George. And she is originally described as coming on the ship as being very reserved, somewhat demure and shy, and not very sexually expressive at all. That is just not in her nature, at least on the surface of it. However, she is in charge of this new Federation technology that the Enterprise is out to field test on this planet. And it is an implant that is put behind the ear here that will psychically link the wearer, an Enterprise crew person, to a native of this planet that they are doing a cultural survey on. And by linking to these previously screened natives of the planet here, the wearer of the implant will be able to read their instincts and their experiences, their likes and dislikes, understand the language, the culture in general, so that then when they go down to investigate this planet, they can link to these members of that society and slip in very easily and not be noticed as outsiders. They can speak the language, all the colloquialisms, they know the customs and the traditions. This will keep them out of trouble, and they can study close up what this culture is like. What could possibly go wrong? So Sarah is in charge of scanning quite a number of the natives of this planet here, the alien culture, and then will take those profiles of those people and then pair them up with people on the survey team from the Enterprise. And she's always been sexually reserved, and so she has this idea, for some reason, that maybe this might be her chance to experiment a little without getting too much out of control, and kind of have an excuse for this sort of a thing. So she pairs herself with a woman on the planet who is basically of the oldest profession, shall we say. And Sarah George, like apparently, according to the novel here, like every other female on the ship, is in love with Mr. Spock, who pays no attention to any of that. So she pairs Mr. Spock with this fairly sexually aggressive member of the Planet Society, hoping that as they're working together, there might be some sparks kind of flying between the two of them. That seems like a really good idea for an ensign. Why would an ensign be in charge of a project like this anyway? But this is what she does, and it just, of course, goes completely wrong. Now, when she's starting to exhibit these new feelings, and she's feeling free to express them because she's paired with this person on the planet. Oh, by the way, they call the people that they're pairing with from the planet doppelgangers, or for short, DOPs. So she is paired with this DOP who is very promiscuous and unbridled, and so now she is becoming that way. And now this kind of sexism is going to intrude on some of our favorite characters. McCoy is talking to Kirk early on in the story here, and is surprised to hear about this behavior that Sarah is exhibiting, because she's always been so shy and reserved? Why, in fact, McCoy is admitting to having once given her a friendly pat on the derriere one time, and she just about bit his head off. She was just so offended. And he just said it's just a shame that such a pretty girl would have such outdated ideas of sexuality. Now, maybe back in the days of new wave science fiction and things where they were getting a lot more sexual in storytelling and science fiction in general, in the Star Trek world, we don't want to stand for that kind of a thing. And in fact, if Spano had been doing his job, not that I know that he had a chance to see what changes Cogswell had made to his original story, he might have corrected some of this. I don't know this, but we know as a fact, going back to the episode of Charlie X, that this sort of thing just would not have passed. And there was a big story point in Charlie X about this exact type of behavior, and it didn't fly on Kirk's Enterprise. But now in Spock Messiah, we have Kirk himself waiting for Ensign George to show up in the transporter room or somewhere. They're about to beam down on the mission here, and waiting for her, and says things like, "Where is our little sex pot anyway?" So all these aspersions that McCoy is partaking in, and later on even Chekhov is saying things like this. And then once they're down on the planet, Kirk is actually assigning her to really tap into that dop that she's paired with and use any feminine tricks and wiles, her sexuality, exploit it as much as she possibly can to help fulfill the mission here. Now, the mission is to, ostensibly, to just a kind of a cultural survey. But the problem is that thanks to Ensign George's tampering with Spock and the person that he's paired with down there, who's not only a sexual beast, but also a wannabe messiah. He's he's a religious zealot who has always failed to be able to grow his cult. But now that he's paired with Spock, something has gone wrong, and the alien on the planet, they're called corrosions. So I guess we'll just call them corrosions from now on rather than aliens. The corrosion cult leader is able now to control Spock. Spock has beamed up. This is all in the first couple of chapters, so I don't know if I need to give any spoiler alerts here if you're going to still want to read this book. But Spock has stolen the trilithium control crystals from the ship to keep the ship from leaving. And what Spock doesn't know is that there is some radiation coming in from somewhere across space or subspace somehow that they don't understand, but it is going to come within a few days and render the ship uninhabitable. And so they need to get Spock back, get the crystals back so they can warp out of Dodge and get Spock back to normal. So because Ensign George has early on claiming to already have seduced Spock once he was paired with his dop, and they have made love, as they say, Spock is completely compromised at this point, and he, as we read the book, he just comes off as this horn dog Vulcan character. Well, not even a Vulcan character now. He's just a corrosion cult leader. And he's, because of Spock's knowledge and memories, is able to finally be effective at growing this cult and taking over the planet. And that's the basic setup of the book. All that stuff really happens in the first 2 or 3 chapters, and it goes from there. It's not a very long book, so if you do happen to want to read this book, it won't take you very long. And it might be, at least if you're a Star Trek nerd like I am, it might be at least historically interesting to kind of track along these early Star Trek novels just to see how the culture, the Star Trek culture, has developed with the fans. Boy, I guess I drank the Kool-Aid early on because I'm struggling to defend it at the same time not to defend it. But anyway, that's where the story takes off. I remember when this book came out, and I first saw it on the book racks in the store, and I picked it up, and I was excited. I couldn't wait to get home and to start to read it because I was hungry for new Star Trek fiction, and or new Star Trek anything, and there had been no original novels for 5 or 6 years now since Spock Must Die had come out. So I wanted to read this, but I do remember being disappointed. I don't remember being horrified, at least not as much as I was here recently when I reread it for this video here. A lot of things really do jump out at you. But at the time, I had just turned 21 and had been reading a lot of new wave science fiction. And so a lot of this stuff didn't seem quite in character, but it wasn't as appalling, I don't think, as a lot of people criticize this book for being. Now, one of the big criticisms of this book is that the characterization of our Enterprise crew is just completely wrong. I don't think that's completely true. Just having talked about the things that we had just mentioned here about the racism and the sexism does not fit our characters. But other than that, if you're looking to read a Star Trek book, original Star Trek story that has Kirk's command decisions and his way of thinking on his feet and turning death into a fighting chance to survive, all those kinds of things, Scotty's brilliance at engineering and figuring things out without much to work with, McCoy's wisecracks, all that stuff is in there. But you might find that it's completely overshadowed by all this other stuff that we've been talking about. And I think that's a fair criticism. But one of the things that really bothered me when the book came out falls far short of any of the other things that we've mentioned here so far. But that was that Scotty is described as having red hair. That one really bugged me because it was just wrong. It was just incorrect. And if Spano knew the character so well, certainly he knew that Scotty does not have red hair. But I think what happened again is that Spano didn't write anything about the color of his hair. He turned the manuscript over to Cogswell, and Cogswell, not knowing any better, trying to give little descriptive clues again, like he did with Sulu and Uhura, talks about the Scottish guy with red hair. So things like that are peppered throughout the story. Now, this again, like I say, was not under anybody's watchful eye as far as editing it. No one from Roddenberry's office, nobody from the network, nobody even from Bantam was overseeing any of the consistencies here, except for one thing. And I will say that, and this might have been Cogswell, reading Spock Must Die first, or this might have been a direction from Bantam in some way. This was to be the next original Star Trek fiction from Bantam, and so mentions a lot of the events in Spock Must Die. So you might be able to say that Spock Messiah is a sequel in a lot of ways to Spock Must Die, because of the events that happened in that also happened in the past in the world of this particular novel. The one thing that we know that Fred Pohl did tell Cogswell when he gave him this assignment was get them off the damn ship. That was the one directive that he had for sure. And Cogswell certainly did that. Spano and Cogswell did. Now, as far as getting them off the ship, another thing that I might say about in the pro column of the book is that the world building for this planet it's not too bad. It's interesting and I don't want to say compelling, but it's deep enough to get you through the less than 200 pages of the book here in feeling that this is a real planet and a real culture that is developed at least as far as what we're used to from Star Trek episodes themselves, and probably even more so. Okay, so that's a lot to get through. I don't know if you could tell as I'm recording this here, I'm trying to choose my words very carefully to describe this whole scene here. But let's move on to the final part of the video here and move on to what probably most people would consider the best part of the book, and that is the cover art. So we'll start off with the very first September 1976 cover. Had an illustration by Gene Szafran, and I think it worked great marketing-wise. When I first saw this book, not only was I excited because it was a Star Trek book, but the artwork itself was pretty compelling. He gave us that stylized Mr. Spock there with all those vibrant colors. It was familiar in one way, and it was kind of threatening in another way, so it looked exciting. And what Star Trek fan in those days would not have to buy this book? What I really like about it, I liked this then, but even more so now after so many Star Trek novels have come out, is that this looks to me like an illustration that was designed specifically for the story in this book. We've seen way too many, more often than not, just paintings of the characters' heads and faces against some kind of a starscape behind them and the Enterprise stuck in there somehow. And that's about it. Could go on almost any Star Trek story that had those particular characters in there. And they really, very rarely have anything to do specifically with the story in that book. And this one, I think, clearly does that and was designed and not just executed. Szafran is showing us Spock, Mr. Spock there, one of our favorite characters, standing there in a confident and defiant and threatening stance against either a planet or a sun behind him. Not sure what that is really. Having read the story now, is that Kairos the star, or is it the planet that they're beaming down to investigate? Not sure. I would guess that it's probably the star or another object that is creating the radiation that is crossing space quickly towards our ship in orbit around the planet, that is going to destroy, because the radiation is going to kill everyone on the ship and make it impossible to get away. And this is part of what contributes to the extreme deadline that Kirk has to get Spock fixed up and back to the ship. And then there's the Enterprise tucked in there. And I wonder if that was an afterthought. I wonder if an art director came in and said, we got to have the ship in there somewhere. And Szafran adds it in, but it's the least abstract part of the entire illustration. And in fact, it looks like it was copied from the Lou Feck illustration from Star Trek IV. It's got this, it's the same exact angle and the same lighting, which is not the typical shot of the Enterprise that we will usually see. So to me, that looks like that might have been kind of added in after the painting was completed. Now, if I wanted to get picky, and I usually do, a little detail here, Spock should not be in his Starfleet uniform here. By the time he is taken over by his corrosion dop, as far as his behavior goes and all that, ever after that, he is wearing his corrosion priest robe with a big hood that also covers his face completely. That is sort of a cultural thing on the planet. Everyone it covers their face if they are of a certain level of society. However, it makes sense marketing-wise not to cover Spock up so that we can recognize one of our favorite characters here and want to buy the book. If it was just a character in a black robe as described in the book, it wouldn't really look like a Star Trek cover. So I guess we can give Szafran a pass on that. Now, Gene Szafran was a pretty significant science fiction illustrator back in the 70s in particular. So if you collect vintage science fiction and have any of the popular paperbacks from the 70s, you're probably familiar with his work. So here are just a few examples of some of his better-known work, but admittedly, this is just the tip of the iceberg as far as Gene Szafran's artwork goes. Now, a lot of people would say that his 1974 cover for Anna Kavan's Ice is his most iconic work. But for me, it's always been the art from Poul Anderson's The Corridors of Time. I always loved that cover, and I think it's what first made me notice Gene Szafran. And then he's probably most recognizable for his ongoing series of covers for Signet's line of Robert Heinlein editions. And I think in all of these that we can really see his terrific stylized surrealism and his psychedelic approach. He used a lot of airbrush for that dreamlike realism. And he also liked to use that kind of a kaleidoscopic approach to his layouts, a lot of things shattering from a central circular point. And with a lot of bright, dramatic, and yet controlled colors. It's kind of a thing that he was known for. And then if you are a Szafran fan, and I didn't include one of your favorite covers here, sorry about that. But again, these examples are just the tip of a vast iceberg of his work. All of it is great stuff. And then moving on to the second of three covers that we'll look at here. This cover, the October 1984 edition, was by Spanish artist Enric Torres-Prat, usually signing his name just as Enric. Now, in the early 80s, it was pocketbooks that now had the licensing, as I mentioned before, to any original Star Trek fiction. But Bantam was still able to reprint any of their original Star Trek fiction that had been printed before. And by now, there were a lot of Bantam books that they could now repackage and put them up again now to compete with the pocketbooks line. And so this is the book of Spock Messiah here that was ushering in that new layout and that new artwork with that distinctive font there for the title. Now here we do see Spock in his black robe. What's still wrong is the missing hood that should cover his head and face. But again, we want to be able to see that it is Mr. Spock so that it does still look like a Star Trek novel. Again, if we just showed him with his face covered up, we wouldn't really know the difference other than the title. But the background is pretty cool here, and it is described in that way in the book there. There's that lightning, and there are a lot of storms and weather changes due to the incoming radiation that is changing some of the dynamics on the planet itself. Now, it looks like Spock is talking into a communicator here, and if that's the case, then that's wrong according to the story, because Spock has rendered the communicators useless to cut Kirk and the landing party off from talking with the Enterprise. He should be carrying his tricorder. He took that everywhere he went in the story, and maybe that's what's in his other hand there, but we can't really see what he's holding in his other hand, if anything at all. And like with the Gene Szafran cover, one of the things I like about Enric's cover here is that he's also illustrating elements of the actual story. This cover would not be able to be put on any other Star Trek fiction. It's clearly meant for this particular book, and is just avoiding that phony baloney montage of painted versions of cast photos with no regard to the actual story. And then that leaves us with the third and final cover that Bantam has commissioned for an original illustration, and that is the October 1993 edition, with a cover by Kazuhiko Sano. And in my opinion, this is the weakest of the three. Now, he does show us Spock in the ceremonial black robe and the hood. His face still isn't covered up, but then again, like the other two, we don't want to cover Spock's face up. We do need to see it in order to want to buy the book. Now, one of the things that Sano seems to like to do a lot is rely too much on photography of the characters too much. He does not bring his own vision of any drama or anything to his cover illustrations that I've seen. He does have skill in painting what he can see, but I don't believe that he has the talent for painting things that he needs to invent for these covers. For instance, I'm sure that he had a model for the girl there, and I'm sure that's supposed to be our Ensign Sarah George. Took a photo of someone dressed in some kind of a wardrobe here, but Sano cannot for the life of him adjust his lighting. He will take his photographic references, and then whatever the lighting was in those photos taken for different reasons at different times at different places under different conditions, he just paints that literally. And they don't really seem to fit together into a scene. Now, he usually does these montages I was talking about, so scale and perspective and lighting, things like that, don't often matter when it's done properly. But in this case, it's hard to tell if it's supposed to be a montage or just some odd combination of these, the way that Spock and the shoulder of Ensign George is kind of blurring together. The scale is off if she's supposed to be standing in front of him, which I don't think is the case. Spock is the main character, so he's larger. But just the integration there seems a little lazy to me. Now, Sano is doing something that the other two covers did not do, and that is to present the new character of Ensign Sarah George here. Like I say, I'm sure he got a model and dressed her up in something from a wardrobe, but that looks nothing like the provocative, sultry, and wild outfits that the character wore when she's down on the planet. She's wearing this rather conservative gown, it looks to me, and then the hairstyle is just a little too prim and proper for our character, who's pretty much of a wild woman down on the planet. And then that tiara. I think she does wear a tiara down on the planet, but I don't know what that thing is that she's wearing there. It looks like some weird kind of a Doctor Who control box or something, or if she goes into one of her pole dances like she often does in the story, that thing could easily fly off and kill somebody. And it looks completely invented and then just stuck onto her head there. She does not have that voluptuous nature that is described in the book. And I just wonder, where is Frank Frazetta when we really need him? And then getting back to Spock here, I can't really tell what those stringy things are that seem like they're attached to the edges of his hood there and disappear down behind the crystals that he's holding. By the way, the crystals are depicted in the story. Those are the trilithium control crystals that Spock has stolen from the Enterprise to sabotage it and keep it from warping out of orbit. Now, you might think that I'm being a little too hard on Sano's artwork here, and you might be right. You might think this cover is fine. There's really nothing wrong with it as far as covers go. He's really not doing anything wrong that a lot of other cover illustrators haven't also done for a series of books or books like this. But just ask yourself, of your favorite science fiction cover art and artists, does this hold up to that? It just seems to me like he's taking a lot of shortcuts, and there's just too many good enoughs in this to really make it stand out so that you would maybe buy a book just for Sano's cover art itself, like you might do with a Frazetta or a Gene Szafran, those kinds of things. So this is a Star Trek book, and if we're Star Trek fans, we want to love the cover art too, and not just have something that, to me, that just seems like it's just good enough. And so, for example, not to belabor this any more than I already have, but here is a series of covers by Sano. He was commissioned to do all of these Bantam Star Trek books around the same time here. I don't know why. I think that the Enric covers were a head and shoulders above the Sano covers here, and they could have repurposed those, I think, with some of the new graphics here. By the way, the graphics now, in the past, the other two editions really counted on the title of the book being big and the most prominent thing to read on the cover. And now with this new line here with the Sano illustrations, it's the Star Trek emblem, the Star Trek brand that is more important. So I can understand that. I just wish they had continued to use the Enric. But Sano has it, and I think you can look at these examples here and get a pretty good feeling for what he's doing. Is he's just taking photography references, which is nothing wrong with that if he can integrate them properly. But if you look at them, There's nothing new here. These are familiar poses in a lot of cases. You can even recognize the episode that they were taken from, perhaps. You can see that the lighting doesn't match. He's not integrating scenes. And all that is fine. But at least for me, my art director's eye, and as a Star Trek fan, I want something more. So those are the 3 covers commissioned over the years for Bantam's Spock Messiah by Theodore R. Cogswell and Charles Spano Jr. And let's just take a quick look at them all side by side here for one last minute, and just so we could compare them side by side. My personal favorite is, of course, the Gene Szafran cover, the very first one. And I guess I shouldn't say, of course. You might like one of the other ones better, much better, perhaps. But for me, it's a combination of 2 things. One, it's probably going to be my sentimental favorite, just because that was the first time I saw the book itself and picked it up. A lot having to do with the cover. And plus, I just really like Gene Szafran's work. His use of color and his abstract expression and all that. I enjoy collecting his work. I've even got a few paperbacks that I bought just because of his cover artwork. But you might prefer one of the other ones. Maybe one of the other 2 covers here was your first exposure to the book that got you to buy the book, regardless of how you might have felt about the story itself. So, that was quite a book to chat about here as far as Star Trek goes. But maybe some of the insights behind how this book came to be written might not excuse things, but at least explain some of it, perhaps. You may agree or disagree with me about any of those points. I'm not sure I agree with all of my points either, but that's what makes a fun video like this. And aside from in the comments mentioning whatever your favorite cover might be, also feel free to chat about the book itself. Have you read it? Do you want to read it? Did you like it? Were you horrified by it? Whatever you might want to say about the book, let's open up some comments to that effect. It's always fun to do that. We're all Star Trek fans here anyway, and so let's engage. I want to thank Vin at Revenant Reads for creating Book Trek and for continuing it every year. I always look forward to it every year, and I do hope to be doing some more of them this summer. And so until we get a chance to beam down again together, thanks for watching.